super mic'd up. I have a mic on this side, I have a mic on that side. It's kind of fitting. Give me a moment, I have to plug this HDMI cable in. Someone mentioned that they don't know where they would be without music. So, to kind of kick off my presentation, hopefully the sound is courtesy of Netflix. Yes, I ripped it, don't tell anybody. Hey, we got sound. This is important, they gotta hear the music. Oh, you know what? Bear with me for a moment. There we go. Now let's try it. I know probably you're wondering why I'm playing this and why am I playing Beyonce. One of the biggest things about Beyonce's homecoming presentation is that she took the opportunity to use her creativity to pay homage to historically black colleges and universities. So to us, we saw what she did in paying homage. I grew up in Virginia. I was surrounded by several HBCUs from Norfolk State to Hampton University. Is anybody here, did they attend a HBCU or familiar with HBCU by any chance? Right on. Still familiar with it. And so this particular presentation, you know, at once for some people this was just an amazing performance. But for especially us within the African American community, it reminded us of just that, you know, the whole idea of a HBCU, you know, the band, you know, the actual education, because at one point in time we weren't afforded the opportunity to be able to go to the same colleges and universities. So she took her creativity and turned her creativity to affect change, to build wealth, and to preserve history. So I'm going to go ahead and go away from this and switch into my presentation. So my topic, the topic is preserve, and I'm going to be talking about preserving history through creativity. Creative Mornings, according to their definition of preservation begins with asking deep questions and turning our attention to the environment around us. And like I said, the three things that I'm going to focus on is using your creativity to effect change, build wealth, and preserve history. Creativity. Now, a lot of people in this room, and oftentimes, how many, raise your hands, is your first Creative Mornings? Well, as a volunteer, appreciate you being here. As a speaker, I appreciate you coming to listen to me. But we have a lot of people that, you know, they see Creative Mornings, they're just like, I'm not really a creative person. You know, I don't draw. You know, I don't do graphic design, I don't do web design, I don't do videography, I don't do photography. But drawing attention to the dictionary.com definition of creativity, it is the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, methods, and you guys can clearly read the rest. I feel like if you're a teacher, you're creative. If you're a doctor, you're creative. If you are into politics, you're creative. It's not just limited to actually creating art, if you will. Is anybody familiar with the elements known as Earth, Wind, and Fire? And by Earth, Wind, and Fire, I mean the band Earth, Wind, and Fire. I'm a vinyl collector. One of my favorite record stores here in town is Spoonful Records. Shout out to them, shameless plug. One of the lyrics from That's the Way of the World, child is born with a heart of gold, way of the world makes his heart so cold. These are my maker's makers. This is my grandfather and my grandmother. They're a very stylish couple. I continue to keep the afro in essence. My grandmother worked for the Social Services Administration in Richmond, Virginia for over 25 years. My grandfather, who is this guy up here also in the upper left-hand corner, he had a band in the 70s called Zebra. He was also an Army veteran. He also worked for the United States Postal Service up until the time he became sick with ALS. He was a photographer, so I was heavily influenced by my grandparents from being able to serve people with my grandmother, working in social services. Even to this day, every Friday she goes to Six Mount Zion Baptist Church, which is the oldest church in Richmond, Virginia, and every Friday she feeds the homeless. Matter of fact, I called this morning, she was on her way there to do that now. So I was surrounded by people who served, and I was surrounded by a photographer, videographer, and my grandparents had lots of vinyl records, clearly. Here's another photo of my grandfather looking very much so like a band member. Now, one thing about my grandparents, they weren't, they didn't have a lot of wealth. When it comes to our generation, especially in the African American community, our grandparents and parents are only a few generations removed from slavery. So we didn't have the opportunities of having, generational wealth where, wills and trust funds were passed to us, because we were still just trying to get from above the ground. This is the starting plane, and this is African Americans and minorities, so we got to get here first before we can even transcend to here. So it's the point of getting to right here first. One of the biggest things is I felt like because I did not have, financial trust funds and things like that, I wasn't able to go forth and actually, do bigger things, in the world. All I had was the skills that my grandparents taught me, which was to serve, the skill of using a camera, to even use music to affect the change. So going into the numbers specifically, this is, very clear chart talking about the racial income gap, and specifically talking about how things have changed and not changed. Unfortunately, because we didn't have that opportunity to start out with having land or all those different things, we had to use our skills or what we were imparted with by our ancestors in order to in turn and create generational wealth. If the trajectory of the past 3 decades continues, by 2050, the median white family will have $174,000 of wealth. It's really not that much. While Latino median wealth will just be $8,600, and black median wealth will head downward to $600. That's the wealth of a family, $600. I think the majority of us in here, our rent is more than $600. In fact, the median black family is on track to reach zero wealth by 2082. This is according to the Institute of Policy Studies. Make sure you always cite your work. Now I'm talking about the power of black dollars. One thing about the African American community is that we spend a lot of money on ethnic hair and beauty products. Whether it's shea butter and your cocoa butter or your shea moisture and things like that. That's something that's very important. But the black dollar, as they say, or the consumer dollar, is extremely, extremely, extremely large. But we spend more time being consumers rather than producers. Wealth is not what you make, but what you keep. Consumers versus producers. Consumer is a person or organization that uses a commodity or service, while a producer is a person who creates economic value or produces goods and services. Now remember Beyonce, I played that for a reason. And by the way, my favorite Beyonce song is Love on Top, if you wanted to know. Buying power is not a measure of wealth, but of our capacity as consumers. Just because we have that amount, we spend so much money as consumers. And one of the biggest things in the work that I try to do is I try to tell us and show that, look, we have to take that same money that we're actually consuming and then reinvest it back into ourselves. A lot of other different demographics, they know how to, keep their dollar or their money within their community to help build their community up. Now, defining wealth. Wealth, anything that has utility and is capable of being appropriated or exchanged. My talk is not about cultural appropriation, but I highlighted that word appropriated for a reason. Value. Definition of value, relative worth, merit, or importance. To consider with respect to worth, excellence, usefulness, or importance. I think it's very important for us to define words because we say words all the time and we really don't know what those words actually mean. Tristen Walker. Tristen Walker is an entrepreneur. This is Tristen right here. Tristen Walker knew how much money we as the African American community spend on beauty products. So he created a company that was called Bevel, and he made it specifically for people with coarse curly hair. A lot of traditional products, because they were originally created for a specific demographic, it wasn't created or made for African Americans. So he wanted to make and leave a legacy and to give African Americans a product that they could use that will also benefit them as a community. Beyonce Giselle Knowles Carter, entrepreneur and philanthropist. $8 million. $8 million is what she was paid for her Coachella performance. Then what she did in turn was she donated $100,000 to historically black colleges. Again, she took her creativity, she affected change and built wealth to preserve history. $60 million. $60 million was the amount of the deal that she ended up landing with Netflix. That's the wealth building aspect. Again, some people just see her as being a singer. No, she is more than a singer. She is a pillar, she is a philanthropist, and she is showing that we can take our skills, even though we didn't start out with wealth, and then we can create something even better, and we can even create something that will last a lifetime and far surpass our own name. Even the Time magazine talked about what she did and how in her paying homage to historically black colleges, it was a vital role in American history, again, preserving history. And in the words of her husband, me turn that 62 to 125, 125 to 250, 250 to $500,000, ain't nothing nobody can do with me now, who with me? So you can she took that 8 million and then turned it into 60 million. LeBron James, more than an athlete. He's not just a basketball player. One of the greatest things I feel like this man has done, I mean, I'm sure us being in Ohio, we feel like him bringing a title was a great thing. But to me, the I Promise School, he started out in Akron, he came from nothing, and then took his talents as a basketball player and then created an institution to then provide those that didn't have the same advantages, to give them a chance to have the same advantages from an educational standpoint. Nipsey Hussle, the late great Nipsey Hussle. Nipsey Hussle started out in South Central LA. When you see him, you might probably think he's a gang member or something to that effect, but he decided, okay, I came from this impoverished area. I'm gonna take my skills of rapping, which is actually poetry, and I'm gonna show my people how they can in turn take that and to create wealth. Before this man passed, he created something called Vector 90, which is a co-working space in South Central LA. He was in the process of buying up the entire block because it's important for us to own land. At one point, no one in the United States was able to vote unless they owned land. We all know we the people actually stands for those that own land, white males that own land at that time in the Constitution. So again, he took rapping and then turned that art form, took his creativity, he affected change, and then he built wealth, and his legacy still lives on today. Now, bringing it locally here, I don't see anybody from Maroon Arts Group. Is anybody familiar with Maroon Arts Group? Anybody familiar with the Box Park? So one of the things that they've done, a group of creatives, we didn't have all the money in the world, but the Maroon Arts Group, they wanted to create something and leave something here in Columbus that would be beneficial to the entire community. So again, they took their creativity, affected change, and then they did that to preserve history. Shameless plug, the Box Party is this Sunday. If you have never seen it, I definitely highly encourage you to go and see it. Everything that I am involved in, especially up until this point in time, it's all about affecting change, building wealth, and preserving history. My company, Billionaire Bus Media, we started out because we wanted to tell the stories of minority entrepreneurs, trying to show that we are more just than athletes and singers and rappers. We're entrepreneurs, we're tech activists, we're activists to begin with. And certain media outlets don't necessarily reflect that and show that. And then, with any space that you're in, I'm a transgender man, representation is important. And even in that space, we wanted to show other kids, like, look, you can be more than just that entertainer. You're more than that entertainer. There's other opportunities that are available to you. The high-end affair, it's really a really great experience. The CEO is actually sitting right over there, Chef Nikki. It's a great experience in what we do, but the biggest thing is that we're trying to destigmatize the idea of how people view cannabis, especially with the African-American community. We have so many family members that are locked up even to this day, while now you can make millions and millions of dollars in cannabis. Think Youth. Think Youth is a nonprofit foundation that I ended up starting because of my uncle. He had a nonprofit organization called Tony's Kids before he passed away. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to have different initiatives that were available, and I'm very grateful to have some good friends that are helping me. And now we're gonna do a financial literacy course that actually starts the first week in June. We're taking 25 students and we're teaching them the basics of financial literacy, starting with need versus wants. I know a lot of adults in here, it wasn't until we became adults we realized, okay, this is a need, this is a want. Before you can teach about credit, you have to teach about the basics. And then I also work with MAC, which is the Multi-Ethnic Advocates for Cultural Competence. They work to show why cultural competency is extremely important. All of these different organizations that I'm a part of, again, I'm taking my skills as a creative, whether I'm doing, it's not just a website. You know, when I'm building a website, I'm thinking about the individuals that are gonna be accessing that website. You know, if I'm building a graphic or a logo, I want it to reflect the main mission and goal of that organization or whatever I'm doing. A photo is not just a picture. A photo to me tells a story. My grandfather, he actually, when Jesse Jackson decided to run way back when, he was the actual individual that recorded his presidential speech back in, don't get me lying, 92, maybe in the 80s, one or the other. But to be able to see that tape and my grandfather doing that, he preserved history and he was there in a moment of time. He ended up giving it away, you know, to the news station. They said they would pay for it, but to him, he just wanted to be there to capture a point in history. One of the biggest things that I want to leave with you, plant seeds even if you don't directly benefit from the fruits in your lifetime. Oftentimes we don't want to start something because we feel like, oh, it's not going to affect me, oh, you know, it's not going to benefit me now. But we also have to remember we're only on this earth for a short period of time. And we want to make sure in whatever we do, we affect the lives of others. And in that, to wrap up, one of the biggest people and individuals that I want to pay homage to today is Amber Evans, because what she did, even to this day, continues to affect us, and she planted those seeds, and her legacy continues to live on. That's the end of my talk. Thank you.